This is the Plateau Mont-Royal, the most bike-friendly of Montreal's 19 boroughs, with a bike score of 94 out of 100. Living here inspired us to start this YouTube channel because the Plateau, alongside a few other bike-friendly boroughs like Rosemont-La Petite-Patrie, provides a pretty good example of how cycling can work in North America. The Plateau has bike infrastructure going back to the 1980s, including early versions of the two-way cycle track on Rachel Street that were installed in 1989, and is still seeing major improvements to the present day. 2020 saw the creation of an express bike corridor in Saint-Denis, transforming it from a street most people would not be comfortable biking to one of the city's top bike routes, easily surpassing 1 million passengers a year. Living in the Plateau, it was hard not to be impressed at the cycling culture that's developed, where people use their bikes for fun and to get things done. We commonly saw parents taking their kids to school by bike, lots of residents here bike to work according to the census, and we saw a surprising number of cargo bikes doing deliveries, even in the winter. In general, the Plateau has a reputation for idealistic urbanism, whether you see that as good or bad. When cycling skeptics, especially from the suburbs, express their concerns and fears about the future of Montreal, they refer to the plateauization of the city.
How much space do you think bikes take up in this apparent cycling paradise? 5, 10, 20, maybe 30%? Actually, according to a new study, just 2.5% of road space in the Plateau is dedicated to bikes, which includes on-street bike lanes and bike paths, but not lanes with sharrows due to those essentially being a lane for cars where bikes are guests. That 2.5% for bikes compares to 63% of the road space being for cars, including traffic lanes and on-street parking. The study is focused on road space, so those calculations do not include off-street bike paths like those that go through parks, and they also don't consider off-street parking lots, which aren't that common in this densely populated neighborhood, but you can find some, especially on the edges.
2.5% of road space dedicated to bikes is a lot lower than you probably assumed for what is, at least in our experience, arguably the best cycling neighborhood in Canada. You could say that this is a bit of a disappointment. That's the best Canada has to offer, a neighborhood where bikes get 1/25th as much space as cars? There is a much more positive interpretation though, which is to be impressed that that's really all the space we needed to build a pretty respectable cycling experience, where normal people can use a bike to commute to work or take their kids to school. It's far from perfect. Despite the high bike score, there are still gaps and problems, but it's a very good start. Imagine what would happen if we gave bikes 5 or 10% of the road space. That would be an enormous boost to cycling while still leaving plenty of space for other modes. Bikes aren't actually that difficult to accommodate, if we take them seriously.
Across Montreal's 19 boroughs, the amount of road space dedicated to cars ranges from a low of 63% in the Plateau to a high of 89% in Île-Bizarre-Sainte-Geneviève in the West Island. Île-Bizarre is an odd case because parts of it are rural, but Pierrefonds-Roxborough is more or less just standard North American suburbia, and it also gives almost 90% of its road space to cars. The rest of Montreal's suburban West Island probably has similar numbers to this, although those suburban places like Kirkland and Pointe-Claire weren't included in the study because they're independent municipalities and not boroughs of the city of Montreal.
In other videos, we've addressed the idea of a war on cars, the concern many people have that cars are under siege in urban areas due to things like bike lanes, public transit, and pedestrian projects. This language shows up in Montreal too, and places like the Plateau are the biggest target. Despite this perception though, nowhere in Montreal do cars have less space than any other mode. Even in the least car-focused boroughs, namely the Plateau, Rosemont, Downtown, and the Southwest, cars still have about double the space of all other modes combined. In other words, the places perceived as being biased against cars are the ones closest to balance between modes in their transportation system.
So what's behind that perception? Cyclists would bunny hop for joy to have 10% of the road space, but giving only 60% of the road space to the automobile is seen as neglect. A fair point is that motor vehicles handle some tasks that bikes aren't suited for, like large deliveries. But it's not just that. Most vehicles on the road are not handling big deliveries. The lesson is that cars are just really space hungry and hard to accommodate, especially when you consider parking. We don't necessarily see this as space given to cars because it's not used for traffic, but on-street parking alone takes up 7 times more space than bike lanes in the Plateau and 12 times more space than bike lanes across the whole city. The private automobile is just a giant you can keep feeding that will never be satisfied. Obviously, this doesn't mean cars don't deserve space or consideration, but truly being car-friendly seems to require neglecting all other modes.
There's a lot of variation between boroughs and pedestrian space too, which ranges from highs above 25% in the most urban boroughs to lows around 5% in the most suburban boroughs. Pedestrians do better than cyclists everywhere in Montreal because we expect streets to consistently have pedestrian access. A street without sidewalks would be pretty weird in most boroughs, but even in the most bike-friendly neighborhoods, consistent bike access is not guaranteed, even if you count low-traffic streets without bike lanes as being reasonably accessible by bike.
Street space dedicated to public transit is low across the city, but that's not as bad as it sounds because transit has the unique advantage of not always needing street space. The centerpiece of Montreal's transit, the metro, carries 1 million people on an average pre-COVID weekday all underground. Dedicated bus lanes make sense in a lot of cases, and we'd be happy to see more of them. But because of their speed and metal casing, buses at least fit in with car traffic better than bikes do.
Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. We're always happy to see local research like this that helps us understand our cities better. If you can read French and want to take a look at the study, we've linked it in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, big thanks to our supporters on Patreon.